Wildfires ravaged my Northern California home, but the real inferno came when my family betrayed me for the forbidden passion I found in the arms of the man who saved me. As flames devoured everything, paramedic Jordan's touch sparked a desire I'd buried for years. His body pressed close as he pulled me from death's grip. Coming out meant facing their lies, their hate, and a battle for our love that threatened to burn us both to ashes. Wildfires swept through Northern California like a merciless beast, choking my small town near Sacramento with smoke and fear. The acrid smell burned my nostrils as I watched the horizon glow an unnatural orange, like the world itself was ending. I'm Ryan, a 28-year-old high school teacher, frantically packing student records in my classroom as evacuation sirens wailed their haunting song across our once peaceful community. The building shook as distant explosions echoed, propane tanks, maybe cars. Each sound sent fresh waves of panic through my chest. My hands trembled as I stuffed grade books and attendance records into cardboard boxes, knowing these papers represented more than just data. They were the lives of kids I'd taught, mentored, watched grow over the past 5 years. The sky burned an eerie orange, and dread gnawed at me, not just for my home or job, but for the secret I'd buried since I was a teen. My attraction to men, a truth I'd hidden from my conservative community, where judgment was as common as Sunday sermons. In this town, being different meant being invisible, and I'd mastered that art of disappearing into the background of my own life. I'd grown up hearing whispers about the Henderson's son who'd moved to San Francisco, about Mrs. Garrett's nephew who struggled with his demons. The language of condemnation was woven into our daily conversations like a warning to anyone who dared step out of line. My own father had once said, "God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," during a family dinner, the words hanging in the air like smoke from his cigarette. I'd stayed too long trying to save one last box of papers when the door slammed open with a bang that made my heart leap into my throat. Jordan, a 32-year-old paramedic, stood there, his gear heavy with ash, eyes blazing with urgency that cut through my paralysis like a knife. "Move now," he shouted, grabbing my arm with strong, calloused hands that spoke of years saving lives. Our gazes locked, and in that chaotic moment, a spark ignited, raw, electric, terrifying. His grip pulled me toward safety, but it also stirred feelings I'd locked away in the darkest corners of my heart, threatening the carefully constructed facade I'd built to survive in a town that demanded normal. A wife, kids, no questions asked, no deviations from the script. Out on the street, ash fell like grim snow, coating everything in a fine layer of destruction. Cars honked frantically as residents loaded possessions, children cried, and elderly neighbors stood confused on sidewalks they'd walked for decades. The familiar had become alien in the span of hours. "I'm Jordan," he said, checking me for injuries with professional efficiency, his hands steady despite the chaos surrounding us. His touch was gentle but urgent, and I found myself cataloging details about him: the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the temples despite being mostly hidden under his helmet. "Ryan," I managed, my heart pounding from more than just the fire's immediate threat. There was something about the way he looked at me, really looked, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. On the evacuation bus, he sat close enough that I could smell the smoke clinging to his uniform mixed with something else, maybe cedar aftershave or just the natural scent of someone who wasn't afraid to take up space in the world. His voice was low when he spoke. "Been on shift 18 hours straight. This fire's alive, unpredictable. Never seen anything move this fast." I nodded, but my mind churned with more than just fear of the flames. I'd grown up in a family where church ruled everything, where Sunday services were followed by lengthy discussions about moral failings in the community. Sermons had branded people like me as sinners bound for eternal damnation, where I'd learned to bury my high school crushes so deep they felt like someone else's memories. I remembered Tommy Martinez in my junior year chemistry class, how my stomach would flip when he smiled at me over our shared lab station. How I'd rushed home to pray the feelings away, kneeling beside my bed until my knees ached, begging God to make me normal. The shame had been so intense it felt physical, like carrying a stone in my chest that grew heavier each day. Jordan's confidence, his ease in his own skin, challenged every wall I'd built over the years. Here was a man who seemed comfortable with who he was, someone who'd somehow learned to exist without the constant internal battle that had defined my adult life. At the Sacramento evacuation shelter, a packed gymnasium buzzing with anxious voices and crying bobbies, he stayed after his shift ended, even though exhaustion lined his features. He handed me a water bottle, the plastic warm from his palm. "You holding up okay?" he asked, genuine concern softening his tone in a way that made something crack open inside my chest. I found myself confessing my worry for my students, how families in our district had been hit hard by the economic downturn even before the fire, how some of these kids were already struggling with parents working multiple jobs or dealing with addiction. The fire was just one more trauma piled onto young lives that had already seen too much. He listened without judgment, nodding at the right moments, asking follow-up questions that showed he understood the weight of caring for other people's children. Then he opened up too, his voice growing heavy with old pain. Lost my partner 3 years ago in a car crash, hit by a drunk driver on Highway 50. Completely shattered me, made me want to guard my heart from ever going through that kind of loss again. The word partner hung between us, loaded with meaning I was afraid to interpret. Then quieter, he continued, being gay in emergency services, it's a constant fight. Some guys are cool, but others, they find ways to make you know you don't belong. Comments in the locker room, getting assigned the worst shifts, having your backup arrive just a little too late when you call for help. His words hit like a shockwave that reverberated through every nerve in my body. I'd never spoken my truth aloud to another living soul, never admitted the nights I'd lain awake staring at the ceiling, hating myself for who I was, wondering if the prayers and therapy and desperate attempts to change would ever work. The weight of his courage pulled at me like gravity, daring me to face what I'd hidden for so many years. But the expectations of my family, the certain judgment of my community, loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. My sister Emily, the only person in my family who'd ever hinted that she might suspect, had once whispered during a family gathering, "You know, Ryan, you don't have to hide forever. The right person will love all of you." Could I risk everything, my job, my family relationships, my place in the only community I'd ever known, for a spark born in the middle of a natural disaster? As Jordan walked away to respond to his next emergency call, his radio crackling with urgent voices, I watched him go, torn between the familiar safety of fear and a longing I couldn't name but felt in every cell of my body. The gymnasium around me continued its symphony of displaced lives, children asking when they could go home, elderly people wondering if their houses still existed, families huddled together on cots trying to make sense of losing everything they'd built. But all I could think about was the way Jordan had looked at me, like I mattered, like I was worth saving from more than just the fire. The shelter became our temporary world, a strange purgatory where normal life had been suspended and replaced with the basic human need for survival. Cots lined the basketball court in neat rows, each one representing a family's sudden displacement. The constant hum of worried conversations mixed with news reports that played on repeat from television screens mounted high on the gymnasium walls. Jordan and I kept finding each other in this chaos, drawn together like moths to flame despite the dozens of people surrounding us at all times. His texts began coming between grueling shifts, each message a lifeline thrown across the growing space between who I'd been and who I might become. Still out here fighting the beast. Stay safe, Ryan, thinking about you. My replies grew bolder with each exchange, laced with warmth I couldn't suppress, each word a tentative step toward a truth I wasn't ready to name. Be careful out there, these kids need their heroes coming home safe. And then later, after I'd stared at my phone for 20 minutes, I need you coming home safe too. The fire reports grew worse daily. Entire neighborhoods consumed, landmarks that had defined our community reduced to ash and memory. The elementary school where I'd learned to read gone. The diner where my family celebrated birthdays for 20 years, nothing but a blackened foundation. Each loss felt personal, like pieces of my identity were being erased by flames. One night he showed up at the shelter with a fresh bandage wrapped around his forearm from a fall during a rescue operation, his face etched with the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than just needing sleep. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, and soot streaked his cheek like war paint. "Needed to see a friendly face," he said, managing a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Been a hell of a day. Lost 3 houses on Maple Street, including the Johnsons' place. You know them." I did. Mr. Johnson had been my shop teacher in high school, a gentle man who'd patiently taught clumsy teenagers how to use power tools without losing fingers. His wife made the best apple pie for the annual church bake sale. The thought of their small yellow house with its perfectly maintained garden going up in flames made my throat tight. We slipped outside into the cooling night air, away from the constant press of bodies and voices, away from the fluorescent lights that made everyone look sickly and desperate. The air was still thick with smoke, but out here we could almost pretend we were just 2 people having a normal conversation instead of refugees from our own lives. Under a dim streetlight that flickered intermittently, creating shadows that danced across his face, he leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away, to run, to maintain the walls I'd spent years building. His lips brushed mine in a kiss so tentative it felt like a question being asked in a language I'd forgotten how to speak. My breath caught in my throat, and panic surged through my bloodstream like ice water. The kiss lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in those seconds I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, felt the careful architecture of my closeted life begin to tremble. I can't, I whispered, stepping back so quickly I almost stumbled over a piece of broken concrete. My voice was trembling, betraying the war happening inside my chest. My family, they disown me. The church, my job, everything I've built here. Jordan's face fell, and I watched pain flicker across his features like candlelight in wind. It was an expression I recognized, one that spoke of old wounds being reopened. "I've been here before," he admitted, his voice raw with remembered hurt. "There was a firefighter at my old station in Reading, Derek. We'd grab coffee after shifts, text each other constantly. I thought he cared about me the way I cared about him." He paused, running a hand through his hair, and I could see him gathering the strength to continue sharing something that still had the power to wound him. We were together for about 3 months, secret, of course. He was terrified someone would find out. Then rumors started. Someone saw us at a restaurant in the next town over. Within a week, he acted like he'd never known me, wouldn't even make eye contact during briefings, left me to face all the whispers and pointed looks alone. That kind of rejection, it hurts in places you don't recover from easily. His story echoed my deepest fears with such precision it felt like he was reading from the script of my nightmares. My family was devout in a way that left no room for interpretation. Their love came with conditions that had been made crystal clear my entire life. Marry a woman, uphold tradition, produce grandchildren, hide anything that deviated from God's plan as they understood it. But Jordan's courage, coming out at 20 despite losing his parents' support, building a life authentic to who he was despite the professional challenges, made me question the silence I'd chosen as survival. Over the following days, we kept meeting in secret, stealing moments by the shelter's edge like teenagers sneaking around their parents. We talked about his childhood in a small Oregon logging town where being different could get you beaten up, about my struggles to fit in at church youth groups where other boys talked about girls they wanted to date, while I memorized Bible verses to distract myself from looking at them too closely. "You know what the hardest part was?" he asked one evening as we sat on a concrete barrier behind the building, sharing a bag of stale vending machine chips. "Learning that I was worth the risk, that my happiness mattered as much as other people's comfort." His hand found mine in the darkness, warm and calloused and steady despite everything that had tried to shake him. "You're worth the risk too, Ryan. You're worth fighting for." But doubt gnawed at me like a physical hunger. Could I face the fallout of being seen with him? The inevitable questions, the sideways looks, the slow social exile that would follow. My colleague Sarah, who'd always been kind and who I'd counted as a genuine friend, had started noticing my distraction. "You seem different lately, Ryan," she said one afternoon as we sorted through donated clothes for displaced families. "Happier, but also scared, like you're carrying something heavy." I brushed off her observation with a joke about the stress of displacement, but her words lingered. Was my internal struggle that obvious? If Sarah could see it, how long before others did too? The fire jumped containment lines like a living thing with malicious intent, threatening Sacramento's suburban neighborhoods and forcing another wave of evacuations. Jordan was called to a high-risk zone where flames had surrounded a residential area and families were trapped. The radio chatter from his unit grew increasingly urgent as the afternoon wore on. News flashed constantly on the shelter's TVs with reports of injured first responders, each headline twisting my stomach into tighter knots. My phone became an anchor I checked obsessively, waiting for updates that didn't come. Hours passed like days, each minute stretching into eternity. Then my phone rang hospital. The display showed Sacramento General, and my heart dropped into my shoes. "Is this Ryan?" a tired-sounding nurse asked. "You're listed as Jordan Martinez's emergency contact." When had he done that, the question barely registered as she continued. "He's stable, but we'd like you to come in. Smoke inhalation and a sprained ankle from a roof collapse. He's been asking for you." I rushed through the hospital's automatic doors, following antiseptic-scented hallways to the emergency department. I found Jordan in a curtained bay, oxygen cannula in his nose, his right ankle elevated and wrapped, lungs working harder than they should have been. But when he saw me, his eyes brightened despite the obvious pain. "You came," he murmured, and something in his voice suggested he hadn't been entirely sure I would. In that sterile room, with machines beeping and the smell of disinfectant sharp in my nostrils, truth spilled out of me like water from a broken dam. "I'm falling for you. I'm terrified of what that means, but I can't pretend anymore that this isn't real." Our kiss was desperate this time, a promise made amid fear and uncertainty, but guilt crashed over me like a cold wave even as it happened. My family, my job, my entire life in this town, what would authenticity cost me? I thought of my students, the parents who trusted me with their children's education, the colleagues who might turn away if they knew. Jordan reached for my hand with his free one, the other tethered to an IV line. "We don't have to rush this," he said, but his voice carried a plea I could hear clearly. "We can take it as slow as you need. I need to know you're not going to disappear when things get complicated." I wanted to promise him that, wanted to believe I had that kind of courage. But the world outside these hospital walls felt like a minefield, ready to explode with judgment at the first wrong step. Back at the shelter later that night, I overheard fragments of conversation that made my blood run cold. Someone had seen us together at the hospital. A volunteer mentioned seeing that teacher with the paramedic who got hurt and wondering about the nature of our relationship. My heart sank as I realized the gossip machine was already turning, and it would only be a matter of time before word reached the wrong ears. The hospital kiss had felt like making a sacred vow, but reality struck with the force of a physical blow. My brother Mark's text arrived the next morning like a poisoned dart. "Heard you're getting cozy with some paramedic. Mom's having a complete meltdown. Dad's talking about having a family meeting. What the hell, Ryan?" Word had spread through the intricate network of mutual friends and community connections that bound our small town together like spider silk, invisible until you were caught in it. Someone who knew someone who'd seen us at the shelter had talked. A hospital volunteer who recognized me from parent-teacher conferences had mentioned something to a friend. The gossip had taken on a life of its own, growing and mutating as it passed from mouth to mouth. I confronted Jordan in a quiet corner of the gymnasium, my voice barely above a whisper because even here, surrounded by displaced families dealing with their own crises, I felt the weight of watchful eyes. "We need to slow down," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "People are talking. It's going to get back to my family, to my school board. I'm not ready for this." Hurt flashed in his eyes, a raw pain that echoed his past betrayal, that firefighter who had vanished the moment their relationship had sparked rumors. The parallel wasn't lost on either of us, and I watched him recognize the pattern even as I was creating it. "Is this about me?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled but fragile underneath. "Or is this about you hiding from who you are?" It was both, but I couldn't admit that truth without facing parts of myself I'd spent years avoiding. Before I could answer, his radio crackled to life with an emergency call. The fire had surged again, an angry beast that seemed determined to consume everything in its path, and it was now engulfing my own neighborhood. Against direct orders and department protocols, Jordan risked everything to check on my apartment, navigating through smoke-choked streets and around fallen power lines to reach the complex where I'd lived for the past 4 years. He found me there, stupidly trying to save photo albums and my grandmother's quilt, and physically dragged me out as the walls began to collapse behind us. "I couldn't lose you," he coughed, ash-streaked and struggling to breathe, as we stumbled toward his emergency vehicle. "Not like this, not when you're still running from us." In the ambulance racing toward the hospital, I held him as his breathing grew labored, whispering apologies that felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd risked. My heart was torn between overwhelming love for this man who would endanger himself to save my possessions and terror of a world that was closing in around us, ready to punish us for the crime of loving each other. But the worst was yet to come, and it would make the fire seem gentle in comparison. My family arrived at the hospital like an approaching storm system, their faces set in expressions of cold disapproval that I remembered from childhood, the look that preceded serious consequences for serious transgressions. They'd driven up from their hotel in Sacramento as soon as Mark had called with updates about the fire and my situation. "Who is he?" Dad demanded, eyeing Jordan like an intruder who'd broken into our family's sacred space. His voice carried the authority of a man who'd never questioned his own moral certainty, who'd built his identity on being right about everything that mattered. I froze, my throat constricting with years of accumulated shame and fear. Every Sunday sermon about abomination and sin, every hushed conversation about neighbors who'd fallen into sin, every prayer I'd whispered begging God to change me, it all collapsed onto my chest like debris from a burning building. Later, alone with my family in a sterile hospital waiting room, Mom's voice cut through me like shattered glass. "The rumors say you're with him, that you're living in sin, Ryan. It's wrong. It's an abomination in God's eyes." Their words dragged me back to childhood with visceral force. I was 8 years old again, listening to Pastor Williams describe the fate awaiting those who chose unnatural desires. I was 16, spending nights on my knees beside my bed, praying desperately to be fixed, promising God I'd do anything to be normal. I was 22, declining every invitation from college friends to visit gay bars, terrified that even proximity to that world would damn my soul. In that moment, faced with the disappointed faces of people whose love had shaped my entire identity, I crumbled. I denied everything, my voice shaking with shame. It's not like that, he's just a friend. People are making assumptions because he helped me during the evacuation. Each word felt like swallowing poison, betraying not just Jordan but the fragile, authentic version of myself that had been struggling to emerge. I watched understanding dawn in my mother's eyes, not acceptance, but relief that I was still willing to lie to preserve the family's comfort. The real devastation came 2 days later when Mark, whether from misguided concern or simple cruelty, decided to make my private struggle into public spectacle. He outed me on social media with surgical precision, posting a photo someone had taken of Jordan and me at the hospital. Please pray for my brother Ryan, who's lost his way amid these fires. The devil works even in disasters to lead good people into sin. The post went viral within our community like a wildfire of its own. Family, friends, church members, even some of my colleagues liked and shared it, their comments forming a chorus of condemnation that felt like being stoned in the town square, praying for Ryan's healing. So sad when good families are broken by sin. This is what happens when we move away from biblical values. The professional consequences came swiftly. My school board called an emergency meeting. We're getting complaints from parents, the superintendent said, her voice carefully neutral but her meaning crystal clear. Some are questioning your influence on their children. We need to discuss your future here. Jordan faced his own hell at the fire department. A jealous colleague, resentful of Jordan's reputation and looking for weakness to exploit, filed a false report claiming Jordan had been distracted by personal relationships during the rescue that injured him. The accusation revived old wounds from his previous department, whispers and doubts about his professionalism that he'd worked years to overcome. My principal, usually supportive and progressive, pulled me aside after a particularly brutal day. Ryan, I want to help you, but we're getting complaints. Parents are calling, board members are asking questions. You need to be very careful about how you handle this. The message was clear: stay invisible, go back in the closet, or lose everything I'd worked to build. Devastated and drowning in shame, I made the coward's choice. I pushed Jordan away in the cruelest way possible, showing up at his apartment after he'd returned from medical leave. This is too much, I said, tears streaming down my face as I stood in his doorway, unable to meet his eyes. The pressure, the judgment, losing my job, I can't handle it. We need to end this before it destroys both our lives completely. Don't let them win, he pleaded, his voice breaking with the raw sound of someone watching their hope die in real time. Don't let their fear make you choose invisibility over love. But I was already drowning in the weight of betrayal, my family's conditional love, my community's rejection, my own cowardice in the face of consequences I'd always known would come. I walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to me because I lacked the courage to fight for it. Back at the shelter that night, I sat alone in a corner, replaying Mark's social media post and the cascade of hateful comments it had generated. Each notification felt like another stone thrown at my character, another relationship damaged beyond repair. My sister Emily called, her voice tight with anger. I'm on your side, Ryan. I've always been on your side. But Mom and Dad, they're so lost in their beliefs that they can't see they're about to lose you forever. And Mark, she paused, struggling for words. Mark's getting pushback too. Some of his friends are calling him out for what he did, questioning whether that was love or cruelty. I wanted to fight back, wanted to find the strength to stand up for myself and for Jordan and for every other person who'd ever been made to feel ashamed for loving authentically. But the weight of betrayal felt like a fire I couldn't escape, scattering my sense of self like ashes in a relentless wind. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd survived a natural disaster that had destroyed homes and businesses, only to be burned alive by the people who claimed to love me most. Alone in a motel room I could barely afford, I spiraled into the darkest period of my life. The physical fire had been contained, but the emotional inferno raged unchecked. I questioned everything, my worth, my right to happiness, whether I deserved love or if my family was right that I was fundamentally broken. Sleep became elusive, replaced by endless loops of self-recrimination. I'd replay every moment with Jordan, wondering if I could have been braver, if I could have chosen love over fear. Then I'd remember the disappointed faces of my parents, the professional consequences already mounting, and convince myself that hiding was the only rational choice. The crisis counseling center became my lifeline when the thoughts grew too dark to bear alone. Lisa, an LGBTQ plus counselor who'd walked similar paths, listened without judgment as I poured out years of accumulated shame and self-hatred. "You are enough exactly as you are," she said during one session, her words cutting through the noise of condemnation that had become my internal soundtrack. "You don't need fixing or changing or saving from yourself. You need acceptance, starting with your own." She helped me understand that the shame I carried wasn't really mine. It was inherited, passed down through generations of fear and misunderstanding, reinforced by institutions that prioritized conformity over compassion. "Your authentic self isn't the problem, Ryan. The problem is a world that punishes authenticity." I wrestled with memories I'd buried for years, hiding crushes in high school, lying smoothly to my parents about non-existent girlfriends, the constant exhaustion of monitoring every gesture and word to ensure they fit the prescribed masculine mold. Lisa helped me journal through these experiences, slowly rebuilding a sense of self that wasn't defined by other people's comfort. Meanwhile, Jordan fought his own battles with characteristic courage. He filed formal complaints against the colleagues who'd harassed him, enduring hostile workplace investigations and mandatory counseling that felt more like punishment than support. But his persistence paid off. 2 firefighters were suspended, and the department was forced to implement mandatory diversity training and clearer anti-discrimination policies. His texts still came occasionally, carefully worded messages that respected the distance I'd demanded while leaving the door open. "Thinking of you, Ryan. Hope you're finding some peace. We're stronger than they want us to believe." Each message was a lifeline I was afraid to grab, a reminder of what I'd walked away from and might still be brave enough to reach for again. The fires that had brought us together worsened dramatically, forcing the largest evacuation in California history. Entire cities emptied as walls of flame advanced with terrifying speed, and in the middle of this chaos, Jordan vanished. He'd been assigned to a rescue crew tasked with reaching families trapped in a residential area that had been cut off by shifting fire lines. Hours passed with no communication from his unit. Then hours turned into a day, then 2 days, with no word about whether the crew had made it out alive. I spent those days in agony, glued to news reports and emergency radio frequencies, every fiber of my being focused on willing him to survive. The thought of losing him permanently, not to my own fear but to forces beyond our control, clarified everything that really mattered. When news finally came that his crew had been found, alive but injured after 3 days trapped in a basement while fire raged overhead, I didn't think. I just ran. I ran to the hospital, pushed through crowds of reporters and worried families, and found him in the ICU, conscious but exhausted, his hands bandaged from burns sustained while helping evacuate an elderly couple. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation, but his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "No more hiding," I declared, loud enough that other visitors in the hallway could hear. "No more letting fear make decisions for us." I kissed him right there in front of God and everyone, nurses, other patients' families, hospital staff, anyone who cared to look. Some stared in shock, others smiled, a few walked away in disapproval, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I chose love over fear, authenticity over acceptance. The moment felt like claiming my birthright to exist fully and love openly. Consequences be damned. Confronting my family came next, and I approached it with the same determination I'd found in that hospital hallway. I requested a meeting at their hotel in Sacramento, and for once I controlled the conversation. "Your betrayal hurt worse than any fire," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Mark's public humiliation, your conditional love, the way you chose your comfort over your son's happiness, it was cruel. You can reflect on that and change, or we can be done. But I won't pretend to be someone else anymore to make you feel better about your beliefs." The silence stretched like a chasm between us. Then Mom broke down, tears streaming as she admitted her fear came from her own strict religious upbringing, her terror that she'd failed as a mother. "I was taught that loving you meant saving you from sin," she whispered, "but I think I was just saving myself from having to examine what I really believe." Mark, surprisingly, had been doing his own soul-searching. The backlash from his social media post had been swift and harsh. Friends had called him out, coworkers had questioned his judgment, and he'd been forced to confront whether his actions had come from love or cruelty. "I was scared," he admitted, "scared of what it meant about our family, scared of questions I didn't know how to answer, so I tried to force you back into the box where I was comfortable. That wasn't love, that was selfishness." Dad remained silent through most of the conversation, but when he finally spoke, his words carried weight. "I've been praying a lot since this started. Maybe I need to pray about what love really means instead of what I've been taught it should look like." The process of rebuilding those relationships would take years, but for the first time, I felt like we were being honest with each other instead of performing roles we'd inherited. Society's sting lingered in other ways: lost friendships, anonymous hate mail, sideways looks at the grocery store, but we also found unexpected allies. Jordan introduced me to an LGBTQ support group for first responders and their partners, a gathering of people who'd faced similar challenges and found ways to build authentic lives despite professional and personal obstacles. I began speaking at school board meetings, advocating for anti-discrimination policies and inclusive curricula, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each appearance. These kids need to know they're not alone, I argued. They need to see that different doesn't mean damaged. One parent who'd initially been hostile approached me after a particularly contentious meeting. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "My daughter talks about how safe she feels in your classroom, how you see her for who she really is. That's what matters, not who you love, but how you love." My colleague Sarah, who'd suspected the truth for months, became one of my strongest supporters. "I'm proud of you for being brave enough to be real," she said, giving me a hug that felt like absolution. Each small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, but the deeper healing required ongoing work with Lisa. She helped me understand that the trauma of rejection and betrayal would take time to process, that learning to trust again, both others and myself, was a gradual process. Jordan and I grew closer through this period, our late-night conversations becoming a refuge where we could process the day's challenges and remind each other that we were building something worth protecting. We started meeting with LGBTQ youth groups, sharing our story and watching hope kindle in young faces that had learned too early to hide who they were. But I still wondered if we could truly heal from being cast out by those we'd trusted most, or if the wounds would always carry a tender ache that reminded us of the cost of loving authentically. As winter rains finally quenched the massive wildfires, Jordan and I moved into a small apartment in Sacramento's Midtown district, a neighborhood known for its diversity and acceptance. It felt symbolic, leaving behind the ashes of our old lives to build something new in a place where we could exist without constantly looking over our shoulders. The apartment was modest, a second-floor unit with hardwood floors and large windows that let in actual sunlight instead of the orange glow we'd grown accustomed to during the fire season. We furnished it slowly, each purchase a small declaration of permanence, of belief in our future together. One evening in early spring, as we walked along the American River watching the sunset paint the sky in shades that reminded us both of that first chaotic meeting, Jordan stopped suddenly and dropped to one knee on the riverside path. "Ryan," he said, pulling out a simple platinum band etched with a tiny flame pattern, "we've been through literal fire together, and I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you beside me. Through flames and hate, through fear and uncertainty, you've been my anchor. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at this man who'd saved me in every way a person can be saved, from physical danger, from a life of hiding, from the belief that I was unworthy of love. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, and we kissed as joggers and dog walkers passed by, some smiling at the obvious joy radiating from our small celebration. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, two people choosing each other despite everything the world had thrown at them. Our wedding 6 months later was deliberately small but deeply meaningful. We held it in the community center where we'd first volunteered together, surrounded by the chosen family we'd built from allies and supporters who'd stood by us through the worst of times. My sister Emily served as my best woman, tears streaming down her face as she read a poem about love conquering fear. Mark attended too, awkward but trying, bringing his girlfriend who'd apparently given him several lectures about acceptance and family loyalty. My parents came, sitting stiffly in the front row but present nonetheless, a small miracle that represented months of difficult conversations and gradual healing. Jordan's chosen family was larger and louder, fellow first responders who'd fought alongside him for workplace equality, friends from the LGBTQ community who'd welcomed me when I'd finally found the courage to step out of the shadows. The room buzzed with genuine celebration, with people who understood what it meant to love authentically in a world that didn't always welcome that authenticity. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, speaking honestly about the journey that had brought us together and the future we wanted to build. "You taught me that love isn't something to be hidden or ashamed of," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "You showed me that being true to yourself isn't selfish, it's the greatest gift you can give to the world." Jordan's vows made several people reach for tissues. "You chose courage over comfort, truth over safety," You're the bravest person I know, even when you don't feel brave. I promise to remind you of your strength whenever you forget it." The reception was a potluck affair with food contributed by our extended community: tamales from the family of one of my students, casseroles from Jordan's firehouse, elaborate desserts from the local LGBTQ+ Center's volunteer coordinator. It felt like a celebration not just of our love, but of the village that had helped us survive and thrive. We spent our honeymoon not on some exotic beach, but volunteering at a summer camp for LGBTQ+ youth, sharing our story and facilitating workshops about resilience and self-acceptance. Watching young people who'd been rejected by their families find hope in our journey felt like the most meaningful way to begin our married life. Back in Sacramento, we threw ourselves into advocacy work with renewed purpose. I fought successfully for comprehensive anti-bullying policies in our school district, policies that explicitly protected students based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The board meetings were sometimes contentious, but I'd learned to speak my truth even when my voice shook, even when people walked out or shouted objections. Jordan led diversity training programs for emergency services throughout Northern California, using his platform to create safer workplaces for LGBTQ+ first responders. His department, once hostile, became a model for inclusion, earning recognition from the state for its progressive policies. We started a scholarship fund for LGBTQ+ students pursuing careers in education and emergency services, funded through speaking engagements where we shared our story at conferences, universities, and community events. Each time we told our story, we watched faces in the audience light up with recognition, with hope, with the understanding that they weren't alone. The ripple effects spread in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Students began coming out to me, knowing they'd find acceptance and support. Parents sought my advice about supporting their LGBTQ+ children. Other couples in our community found the courage to live openly after seeing us navigate the challenges and emerge stronger. My relationship with my family continued to evolve slowly. Mom started attending PFLAG meetings, initially reluctant but gradually becoming an advocate for other parents struggling with acceptance. Dad, always a man of few words, showed his growth through actions, defending us when relatives made inappropriate comments, proudly displaying our wedding photo in their living room. Mark became one of our strongest allies, using his social media presence to share educational content about LGBTQ+ issues and family acceptance. His transformation from the person who'd outed me in cruelty to someone who actively fought prejudice felt like witnessing a miracle of human growth. But challenges remained. We faced occasional harassment, slurs shouted from passing cars, hate mail left in our apartment building's mailbox, professional obstacles that reminded us that not everyone had evolved. Each incident stung, but we developed the resilience to support each other through the aftermath. One particularly difficult period came when a group of parents tried to have me removed from my teaching position, claiming I was promoting an agenda by simply existing openly. The fight was exhausting and public, with school board meetings that felt more like trials than administrative proceedings. But the support that rallied around us was overwhelming. Students organized walkouts in solidarity. Fellow teachers signed petitions defending academic freedom and workplace equality. Parents who'd initially been skeptical stood up at board meetings to speak about how my authenticity had created a safer environment for all students, not just LGBTQ+ ones. "Mr. Ryan saved my daughter's life," one mother said, her voice shaking with emotion. She was cutting herself, hiding who she was, planning to end her pain permanently, but seeing a teacher who was different like her, who was living openly and happily, showed her that her future could be bright too. The attempt to fire me failed spectacularly, but the process reminded us that vigilance was the price of progress, that each generation had to fight anew for the rights their predecessors had won. 3 years after our wedding, we made the decision to become foster parents, specifically requesting placements of LGBTQ+ youth who'd been rejected by their families. Our first placement was Marcus, a 16-year-old transgender boy whose parents had kicked him out when he'd come out. Watching him slowly learn to trust again, to believe he deserved love and stability, reminded us daily of why our visibility mattered. "You guys literally saved my life," Marcus told us months later, the night before he aged out of the foster system and moved into his own apartment with our ongoing support. Not just by taking me in, but by showing me what love looks like when it's not conditional. We adopted Ember, a rescue dog from the fire zone, whose resilience mirrored our own journey. She'd been found weeks after the initial evacuation, somehow surviving in the burned landscape, thin and scared but alive. Watching her learn to trust again, to play and love without constantly looking over her shoulder for danger, felt like observing our own healing process reflected back to us. Our apartment became a gathering place for chosen family, holiday dinners for friends who'd been rejected by biological families, game nights that ran late into the evening, birthday celebrations that felt more authentic than anything from our closeted past. We learned that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about people who chose to show up consistently with love and support. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on our small balcony overlooking the city lights, ember curled between us, processing the day's challenges and victories. Jordan would take my hand, his thumb tracing over the wedding ring that had become as natural as breathing. Any regrets, he'd ask sometimes, a question that had become our private ritual. About loving you, never, I'd reply, meaning it more deeply each time. About hiding for so long, always, but maybe that hiding made this happiness more precious. 5 years after that first desperate meeting in a smoke-filled classroom, we stood before the California state legislature, invited to testify in support of a bill protecting LGBTQ+ students from discrimination. As I spoke about the importance of safe schools and authentic education, I caught Jordan's eye in the gallery and saw pride radiating from his face. Love is love, I concluded my testimony, words that had become a rallying cry for our community. But more than that, authenticity is courage, and courage is contagious. When we allow people to be their true selves, we create a world where everyone can thrive. The bill passed unanimously, a victory that felt both personal and universal. That evening, as we celebrated with friends at a restaurant in Sacramento's historic district, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The wildfires that had seemed like pure destruction had actually cleared the ground for new growth. The betrayals that had felt like endings had been brutal but necessary beginnings. Jordan raised his glass for a toast, to surviving the fires that were meant to destroy us and choosing to burn brighter instead. Our friends echoed the sentiment, but I was already thinking about tomorrow's challenges, next month's advocacy work, next year's goals. We'd learned that progress wasn't a destination but a journey, one that required constant vigilance and courage. Later that night, as we lay in bed with embers sprawled across both our legs, Jordan turned to me in the darkness. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that fire had never started? I considered the question seriously. Would I have found the courage to come out eventually? Would we have met some other way? Would I have spent my entire life hiding, safe but never truly alive? I think we would have found each other somehow, I said finally. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but love like this, it finds a way. Jordan's hand found mine under the covers, our fingers intertwining automatically. I like to think so too, he murmured, already drifting towards sleep. As I lay awake listening to his breathing steady into sleep rhythms, I felt profound gratitude for the fire that had brought us together and the courage that had kept us together. Our love story had been forged in crisis, tested by betrayal and strengthened by adversity. But more than survival, it had become a beacon for others navigating similar storms. The morning would bring new challenges, it always did. There would be students who needed support, policies to advocate for, minds to change, and hearts to open. The work of creating a more inclusive world was never finished. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of our shared life, surrounded by the family we'd chosen and been chosen by, I felt complete peace. We'd risen from ashes not just as survivors, but as thrivers, as advocates, as proof that love could indeed conquer fear when courage chose to fan its flames. The wildfires had scarred the landscape, but from that destruction had grown something more beautiful than what had been there before, a love that burned brighter than any destructive force, lighting the way for others still finding their courage to step out of the shadows and into the light of their authentic selves. Our story had become part of a larger narrative of progress and hope, one couple among many who'd chosen visibility over safety, truth over comfort, love over fear. And as I finally drifted off to sleep, I smiled knowing that somewhere out there, other people were making the same courageous choice, adding their own flames to the fire of change that would light the way for generations to come.